What sequel feels like a fanfiction of the original? I felt violated after reading that book. I was convinced JK didn't even read that before slapping her name on it. To say it's awful doesn't cover it. It's a complete bottom-of-the-barrel shit show of a fanfic. It made zero sense, spat in the face of the fans and undid all the good of the last 7 books. I genuinely wish I could get my money back for it. But I wouldn't even sell that on to my worst enemy. My niece is currently reading and watching Harry Potter. I will never let her witness that awful book. I cannot upvote this enough. Like you, I've read more Harry Potter fanfic than I care to admit. Significantly more. Cursed Child was worse than most. I once read one where Harry fell in love with the mermaid from the lake and they had some kind of weird fish-human romance. Cursed Child was worse. What makes it worse is that it's supposed to be canon. Multiple people read and approved it before it became canon. In fanfic it's often just the writer putting words down. No one is editing it, checking it, making sure it's not trash. But Cursed Child wasn't just written by multiple people. I'd wager it was read and greenlit by at least 100 before it became a thing, and they all thought it was good enough. That blows my fucking mind every time I think of it. I agree. Come on. I've read better fanfic. I could write better fanfic. Heck, I have written better fanfic. At least my stories are canon compliant when they need to be, which is more than can be said for this disaster. Knowing J.K. Rowling, she'll probably claim to have accidentally approved it by pressing a wrong button whilst researching for something. If anyone knows what I'm getting at, that woman is losing her grip on more than just her fandom. No author with any self-respect would have put their name on a fanfiction of their work as bad as The Cursed Child. Gosh yes, it uses so many fanfic tropes like making originally good characters into assholes for the sake of getting the popular ship together. Poor Raoul is an alcoholic and gambler who doesn't actually love Christine for ... reasons and isn't even the father of her kid. Then Meg is suddenly a psycho bitch just so there's no alternative love interest for Eric. I'm totally in agreement with Michael Crawford. The story was resolved at the end of the original. When lockdown started last year, there was a YouTube channel called The Shows Must Go On. They played theatrical productions for donations to help theatre workers in the UK. My wife showed our daughter Phantom, and for a week, she'd dance and talk about how she wanted to act. The next week, they watched Love Never Dies. That shit got shut down hard. Never mentioned it again and was hesitant to watch musicals now. I summed it up to her grandparents with the Weber giveth and the Weber taketh away. Edit, fat thumbs hitting wrong keys. THR. Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. I mean, I loved The Prisoner of Azkaban, partially because the time travel, which always is super complicated in books, was pretty restricted, but in The Cursed Child, it's just too much and makes no sense. Like how the fact that Voldemort and Bellatrix have a daughter anyways, and the fact that everyone ends up unhappy in the future after the 7th book ends with, all was well just really sucked for me. The Cursed Child is just some cursed fanfic to me. I loved The Prisoner of Azkaban, partially because the time travel, which always is super complicated in books, was pretty restricted, but in The Cursed Child, it's just too much and makes no sense. So much this. The time travel in Harry Potter 3 is my favorite kind of time travel, and it's so rare to find it. There are no alternate, parallel timelines, no do-overs, no nothing. What you do when you go back in time has already happened in the future. All of the weird unexplained stuff suddenly gets explained during the time travel. You get to know. Now it makes sense. X did Y while that other stuff was happening, like the mystery with Harry seeing his father create a Patronus across the pond. Cursed Child just takes all that time travel lore and is like we went back in time and messed things up. Oops, let's try again. Maybe Cursed Child is amazing as a play, no, it might be, and that's great, but what pisses me off is Rowling saying it's canon. No way, not that time travel, not that weird travel lady, not that Voldemort baby. Santa Kosix, one of the main characters, is from a doomed future that he shares with Blaise. A character was canonically from another dimension. and with no explanation why she's there. The main villain is a pure evil monster who happens to look like a darker version of the previous game's darkest and edgiest character, Shadow Sonic, a character who date has eschewed all forms of romance and shown no interest from other characters, falls in love with a human princess. Sonic is explicitly killed by the villain, and is then revived through being kissed by the princess he had fallen in love with. The end of the story sees the entire thing erased from the timeline. Ready Player One made me happy with its immersive world and fun references that I was absolutely too young to get, but that was explained well enough I could still follow along. I liked this character that very much felt like an underdog and had my socially awkward younger self rooting for in full colors. Ready Player 2 took all that happiness and shat on it. I couldn't follow along with half the book because of the obscure and or very unexplained references, and it just made the main character a massive asshole. And not just Toha's a flawed character, it outright felt like a betrayal of the character built in the first book. The only praise I can give it is that it's almost guaranteed not to have a third, and that makes me unreasonably pleased. The biggest disappointment in this movie is that it spends the first 10 minutes painting the picture of a half-ruined world where numerous coastal cities are now derelict and mostly abandoned save for some scavengers and opportunists, showing that people are working on building their own versions of Jaggers, and one of them has figured out a way to make it work without two pilots. Something that was a fundamental rule of the first one. After this opening sequence, all of this becomes irrelevant as the cast are recruited to a military training program. The same monsters inexplicably return because reasons, and then the film basically discards its interesting opening premise to retread the same generic story beats as any other movie. The raw script reads like a 9-year-old playing with Star Wars toys. What if Palpatine wasn't really dead? What if the bad guys had 1,000 Star Destroyers but each one was as powerful as a Death Star? What if Rey was a Palpatine, but then at the end she became a Skywalker? What if Chewbacca died but he was actually on a different transport the whole time? What if the Force could bring people back to life? And that ending, the Scythe one. Guys, Palpatine's descendant literally drained the life force out of Ben Solo, the last of the Skywalker line, immediately after his redemption. Then she buried what was left of the Skywalkers in an unmarked grave in the desert, ensuring that the only remaining record of the Skywalkers is her version, the Palpatine version. She also talked Luke into sacrificing himself, and killed Leia via the Force by killing her son Ben. Rey did a better job at wiping out the last of the Jedi than Palpatine ever could have. I think the biggest thing that pisses me off here is that they ostensibly wiped away the existing EU in order to create better content. Yeah, that makes sense. The constant revival of Palpatine, the new super weapons, the tired Empire versus Rebel narrative coming back over and over again, killing off beloved characters to draw audiences, stories that are tonally inconsistent with the rest of the series, superfluous stories that drag out narrative arcs, and a problem with the Force scaling to allow its users to do ridiculous bullshit. Yeah, I get it. It makes sense that they would do away with that to build something new, and better. Gee, I wonder what they'll do now that they've removed all of those horrible ideas from the mix. It goes deeper than that for me. I will never, ever forgive them for absolutely destroying my childhood heroes. Han and Chewie turn back into criminals after Han gets a divorce from Princess Leia. No. Luke gives up on the galaxy and becomes a shitty old hermit? Question mark. Fucking no. Don't even get me started on Palpatine and Anakin. I just can't. I despise what has happened to my one-time favorite galaxy far, far away. Needless, pointless and lazy destruction for the sake of easy money. And another thing, the lesser-known Sixth Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy book. It was written by a different author after Douglas Adams' death and it's offensively bad. Arthur Dent is barely a side character and most of this story revolves around Trillian starting a relationship with Wobagger, who becomes mortal at the end because Arthur's daughter somehow buys the exact thing needed to do that on Space eBay. It reads so much like bad fanfiction that I half expected an author insert character to show up at some point. I didn't hate it while I was watching it, but it felt off to me in a way that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't until I was telling a friend about it later that I realized just how much I didn't like the movie and why. I don't remember all the reasons, but the main ones that I recall were, Ralph's weird possessiveness, jealousy story arc feels forced, tired, and hard to get emotionally invested in. The portrayal of the internet feels weirdly sanitized. They could have at least touched on some of the darker or more sinister aspects of places like eBay, YouTube, etc., but they didn't. I'm not saying they had to think bad every site on the internet, but let's be honest, there's a lot of sinister stuff on even the major websites, and I'm surprised they didn't at least take some superficial shots at the general skeeziness that tends to manifest online. The whole sequence with Disney's website felt like Disney jerking off at the sight of all the properties they own. In general, Wreck-It Ralph felt like a cinematic love letter to video gaming, particularly classic gaming, and it was hard not to fall for it if you grew up playing those games, or the ones that the fictional ones are based on. T feels like an hour and a half of hey, the internet, oh right, and it just doesn't have the heart that the first movie had. It doesn't feel like a love letter, it feels like a cash grab. I have a problem with the name also. They named it based on a Kim Kardashian, flash in the pan phrase. How did they not at least come up with Ralph wrecks the internet? Edit. I know Kim Kardashian didn't come up with the phrase. It just became mainstream fad-like status to say it after the photo shoot with her butt and champagne glass. Damn. Now if you will excuse me, I need to go find my eyes as they have rolled away with all the actually comments. Crimes of Grindelwald. I'm still fucking furious. We are basically throwing everything we know about the wizarding world in the bin for what? Spoilers to follow, so if you haven't watched it, stop here. McGonagall would absolutely not have been a teacher then. Hell, she wasn't even born for another 8 years. So we just screw up all the timelines to throw her in. We kill off the Lestrange bloodline when we know it continues. Hey, we kill off Letta for fuck knows what reason. Her sacrifice literally did nothing, so her character was for nothing really, which I'm really disappointed about because I had so much in my mind of what she would be and it was just flop and cut her out. Grindel's speech was the fucking worst. They've destroyed Keeney, who was my favorite of all Harry Potter characters ever, more so for her basically drugging Jacob. And lastly, there was absolutely no way Credence is a Dumbledore. Daddy Dumbledore would have been in Azkaban or dead when he was conceived, and Mommy Dumbledore had died. So either it's bull or we are rewriting timelines we already know. Everyone walked out of the cinema so excited. I was, and still am, furious. Bot was such a lovely addition to the wizarding world demo, and they just pissed all over it with Cog. Which BTW, he barely committed any fucking crimes. And lastly, there was absolutely no way Credence is a Dumbledore. Daddy Dumbledore would have been in Azkaban or dead when he was conceived, and Mommy Dumbledore had died. So either it's bull or we are rewriting timelines we already know. Credence could be from another branch of the Dumbledore family. Have they ever established if Albus had dancer uncles? Also, Grindelwald could have been lying. Supposedly, they are working on a third film. It might resolve some of these issues. Also, regarding the film, the whole prophecy thing went absolutely nowhere. It really is awful. Date rape because reasons, plots that fail with no payoff, and when does everyone transition from suits to robes? Also, in Fantastic Beasts we get a plucky protagonist who happens to be caught up in something bigger. But now it's well, of course the best guy for international wizard spy shit is our lovable and slightly autistic beast dude with no military training. Was replying to a guy about Toy Story 4, and I kind of realized Toy Story 4 too felt like this fan fiction where they tried so hard to make a romantic ships between Woody and Bo while ignoring everyone else. Just gonna copy and paste my thoughts right here. Bring Bo Peep back, make her this badass for no reason at all, make it this kind of love story between both of them. Have Woody leave all of his friends and Bonnie to stay with Bo. None of it makes sense either. Wouldn't Bonnie at least know Woody is gone? She still plays with him from time to time, and the ending of Toy Story 3 feels like it didn't matter that much anymore. Feels like some below-average fanfiction a guy would make for the sole purpose of shipping the two. Something that always bothers me with a lot of sequels, Why do they always have to involve the original cast? Naruto, The Last Airbender, Star Wars, they all have interesting settings and we all want more of that juicy world building. But why continue with the same old cast when you can explore a mostly unrelated new story in the same universe? You can have callbacks, sure, but so long as the new content isn't entirely callbacks. Personally, I found Knights of the Old Republic much more interesting than any of the Star Wars sequels because it was new and expanded on the old without cheapening it. What about Force Awakens? It's almost a beat-for-beat recreation of A New Hope, only instead of blowing up one planet they blow up 5 planets, but with no personal connection to the planet in question and they have basically no relevance to the plot. And instead of a battle station the size of a moon it's the size of a planet. Oh, and the plot make no goddamn sense in context. So the rebels won and brought back the Republic. Only they're rebels again because the First Order is bigger and badder than the Empire. Where did the First Order come from? Oh, look, Kylo caught a blaster bolt. Yes, TFA was basically Star Wars over again. But JJ set up a lot of potentially interesting places the story could have gone. It's a strange feeling. I really enjoyed TFA and thought the story would go in new directions. I think TLJ could have really been good if it had been executed better. A few edits here and there and it could have been a good story. There was no saving throws once JJ brought back Palpatine. Both JJ and RJ were on such different pages. The trilogy was never going to feel right. I think either could have made a better trilogy. But there was no way the two of them were going to make one coherent story. I agree 100%. I imagine JJ had an overall arc planned out for his vision of where the trilogy would have gone. I mean, we're just fans and we all had visions of where the story would go after TFA. He can say it all he wants but I don't think Palpatine thing was ever part of his original vision. I think he was basically going to retell the art with different characters, which would have been slightly boring. But it probably would have been fun too. Like TFA, RJ would have taken the whole story in a different direction, but I think that would have been good too as long as the whole trilogy was coherent throughout. I liked the direction he took the story, I really do. I wasn't a fan of Grumpy Luke. I think a less angry old man and more regretful hermit would have been a better angle. But my biggest problem with his vision was how confusing the movie felt. Scenes just felt so different in tone from one another. It really was jarring to go from intense character scenes to quick jokes and feel-good moments. Often within the same scene, I found myself being taken out of his scenes throughout the movie. Some editing would have changed most of that, and obviously JJ trying to course correct for the third movie just turned the whole trilogy into a complete mess. The way they got Luke to that state felt really out of character to me. If it were me, I'd try and do something like instead of him nearly killing his nephew and isolating due to guilt, that doesn't fit with the previous times he has nearly broken, which typically are to do with him trying to protect people he cares about. For example, when Vader discovers Leia is his daughter at the climax of Raj, have him do something like rescue some of the young Jedi and he has to hide to keep them safe. Have the guilt come from him not being able to do anything as the galaxy collapses. Have some of the frustration with Rey turning up be about her potentially leading the First Order to people he was keeping safe, and don't have the whole bit with him not actually reading the sacred texts. I agree. I didn't really mind the idea that Luke would isolate himself after believing that the Jedi teachings were flawed and believing that he wasn't the one to carry the torch, instead choosing to step away and letting someone else who wasn't following the Jedi Code 100% be the person to bring the Jedi back. I actually liked that idea. Felt similar to Yoda in a sense, where Yoda went into hiding to wait for the right time. Luke could have been doing the same, waiting for the Force to call on someone like it did Rey, and tell her that she is the one to bring back the Jedi, basically without the restrictions that created the downfall of the Jedi. The deleted scene at the caretaker village better explain Luke's position than anything left in the movie. They could have focused more on the fact that Luke wasn't against using the Force for good. He was against the strict teachings of the Jedi. I agree about not reading the sacred texts. But that goes to my point about try and sacrificing scene and character for the sake of a cheap joke. There are many examples of that through the movie where he breaks the tension of the scene with a stupid, often out of character joke.